Join me in learning more about the Mayan culture in southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. It's about the indigenous people who learned how to live in the hot, dry Yucatan, the jungles of the lowlands of the Middle South, and the mountains of Chiapas while maintaining cultural coherence. It's a story of intelligent and adaptable peoples who valued their spirituality and their love of family in a land that isn't always predictable and can be dangerous and forbidding. This video is based on a 2-week guided archaeological tour of the Mayan sites in Mexico with lectures and commentary from well-known archaeology professor William Saturno. Bill is a Harvard PhD and discoverer of the murals and Maya scripts in San Bartolo in northeast Guatemala. Are these the same people who built those fantastic temple pyramids all over Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala well over 1,000 years ago? The remains of literally hundreds of city-states can be found hidden in the jungles, forests, and mountains. Most have slowly faded into the jungle landscape. This is a story of long-term success and achievement, followed by environmental catastrophe and political hell. There are an estimated 6 million Mayan descendants alive today in the region, speaking 21 Proto-Mayan languages, all distinct from the others. What happened to their ancestors who were warriors, farmed inhospitable land, artists, construction teams, traders, and astrologers? Their long count calendar is world famous for its complexity and accuracy.
All of the inscriptions that we have for what we think was the classic Maya occur between 8, that 400-year period, and 9, and just a little bit, 20 years into the 10th 400-year period. So it's really about 800 total years that we have covered, but that's it. The calendar itself, of course, was envisioned to have extended back hundreds of years before then, in which they weren't recording the specifics of the date because the calendar round was sufficient, and then hundreds of years after that it would continue to spin on indefinitely.
It was once a thriving part of the world. To understand the Maya is to realize that the whole culture has endured catastrophic trauma several times in the last 1,100 years, which has decimated the population at least twice, and they continue their healing and recovery despite these tremendous obstacles. Their unique culture is a bit like the American Amish, private, spiritual, and hard for others to understand. They are hardworking and have worked for a sustainable way of life in a tough part of the world. Join me in learning more about these fascinating people who have been in Central America for several thousand years. The early Mayans started out along the ocean beaches where fishing was a major source of food, as long as they could find a source of fresh water. Jungle trees were a source of wood to build huts, and there were plenty of reeds and palm leaves to thatch their roofs and keep dry. Their love of this dramatic land grew as they learned how to survive the earthquakes, lightning fires, hurricanes, dangerous animals, and other natural threats to life. This dance of survival is at the root of their conception of the creative God forces in the heavens, the earth, and a firm belief that life goes on even after the death of the body. The Maya and many indigenous people noticed the regularity of the sun and moon and later the planets. The records evolved into a calendar of celestial events. Dr. Bill says it started with noticing the regularity of the sun.
Simple thing, the sun rising, crossing the sky, and setting, dying at night. That establishes the basic rhythm of life for the Maya. And it establishes the basic rhythm of life regardless if you were a king, or if you were a commoner, if you were a warrior, if you were a slave, right? If you have knowledge of the cosmos, or if you know nothing other than planting corn.
Nearly all the indigenous peoples of America, North and South, were organized as tribes, family groups that moved around to follow the wild game they hunted and the seasonal fruits, berries, roots, and grass seeds. Archaeologists say the Mayan civilization started with the cultivation of maize, maybe 4,000 years ago in Belize, with the development of the slash and burn technique of growing food in jungle areas. This technique was developed because food crops did not grow in the shady, brushy forests. Unwanted vegetation was therefore cut down and burned, allowing for corn, squash, peppers, beans, and other crops to grow. But it only worked for a few years. Then the land would have to be rested for as long as 15 years. The empty, fallow land would go back to the jungle, and later the vegetation would have to be cut down and burned again, allowing for another planting cycle. This is still going on today in Central America. The Mayans expanded into the jungle forests using this technique very successfully. Some say taking out enough forest to change the environment. Most of the areas have no rivers or lakes, as it is a huge limestone ledge, not unlike the Texas Hill Country. The only reliable water is in the cenotes, which are sinkholes in the solid rock to access rainwater collected in the underground aquifer. The clans that moved there usually lived near these cenotes. The expanding population meant larger villages and the development of governing systems. The ingenious Maya devised more and better systems to take care of the growing population's needs. The once tribal leaders turned into priests, warriors, and kings, along with their penchant for building large monuments to the gods and themselves. Times were good. The advanced Maya civilization started about 250 AD and lasted about 700 years, during which time the big cities and royal government control arose. Even when there were large cities, most people lived in their small agricultural communities away from the downtown itself. The middle class, or caste, included craftsmen, cloth makers, artists who carved the stone decorations, the priest class, the warriors, record keepers of the calendar, and the merchants who took local goods on the vast network of trails barely wide enough for one man and his backpack. The Maya mathematical system, with a base 20 and celestial observation and record keeping, helped the religious and noble class to predict the seasons and other heavenly events. The royalty learned how to use this information to control the uneducated commoners, mostly farmers and servant class, saying they could also control nature and predict many other future events. The easy ones to predict were the seasons to plant and solar and lunar eclipses. The nobles also said they could manage the climate and animal spirits. For this service, they demanded tribute and contributions to build the temples and the palaces in gratitude to the dozens of gods and the king to keep them happy in exchange for preventing disaster. If something did happen, it was blamed on the people for not giving enough. This system worked for hundreds of years, until it didn't. What happened around 950 AD, when many of the advanced and organized city-states in the rainforest environment depopulated and were abandoned? How could these big, successful cities, often with hundreds of thousands of people, just disappear? Many archaeologists point to a NASA study that showed the deforestation of the Yucatan and other parts of Mexico, which they think caused a long-term drought. Whether it can be rightly blamed on the slash and burn farming practice that was necessary to feed large numbers of people is debatable, but the drought apparently did happen. They also burned many trees in preparing the plaster that decorated the temples and other buildings. What would a drought do? The crops needed rain to grow. No rain, no crops, no food. A long-term famine would spell the end of their belief that their kings were divine and could influence the weather gods. Many people would die in their homes, many would move on, but some would stay and fight over what resources were left. In times like these, other things would begin to happen, such as sanitation collapses. With food being scarce, people would revolt, and villages and kings would war over what is left. Trading routes would collapse, since there isn't much to trade. The stately plastered and painted temples would disintegrate because there was no one to maintain them, and now they are reduced to their stone foundations. In most cases, the jungle and nature have taken over and all but eradicated the once beautiful buildings. It is hard to prove what happened over 1,000 years ago, but something as calamitous as a long-term drought would have done it. It appears that the surviving general population pulled back to smaller climate areas where they could live until normal rains improved. After about 950 AD, until the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, some of the northern Yucatan city-states did okay, particularly Uxmal, Mayapan, and Chichen Itza, and they eventually grew some. The people weren't as religious as they were before, and they relied heavily on the water in the underground basins and the cenotes. The Maya society was not a theocracy or a democracy, and became a very strict caste system with the hereditary ruling elite. Records indicate that the Maya were very concerned with warfare, and many records speak of little else other than disputes over boundaries and family honor. In more formal war, the guerrilla warfare was accompanied with ambushes and traps. Many captives ended up as slaves. The more important ones either had their hearts torn out or were beheaded. The Mayans honored those who gave their life in battle, in ceremonial blood sacrifices involving their genitals, and on the ball court. Life comes from the earth, and sometimes it had to be given back, with gratitude. They thought the shedding of blood was a good way to repay the giver of life. That included the warriors who died, the ritual sacrifice of slaves, women's menses, male genital bloodletting, and death on the ball court.
But the cool thing is in these poor Maya households, you find ceramic, like in little bowls. You find like bloodletting kits, right? And you find little obsidian flakes, little pieces of obsidian, but you find these big ceramic stingray spines. It's like they can't get a real stingray spine, because to get a real stingray spine, it'd have to be imported from the coast, and those are kind of hard to get. You've got to get the stingrays. Those are for the rich people. Those are for the kings. But we still need a stingray spine. So what they do is they have a ceramic effigy stingray spine, but you can't let blood with a piece of ceramic.
You can't put that through your penis.
No, you're not putting that through anything. But what you can do is you can cut with the obsidian, and it can bleed onto the ceramic effigy.
Oh, I got it.
And you actually find the residues of blood on some of those ceramic effigies.
A lot of Maya commoners spent much of their life securing food through hunting and agriculture, including the slash and burn technique. Each Maya household had its own kitchen, garden with vegetables, fruit, and nut trees. Dogs were sometimes raised to be eaten or sacrificed. They hunted deer, turkey, partridge, pigeons, quail, duck, and sometimes armadillos, using the atlatl and arrow, and sometimes blowguns. Most people think the elite noble Maya look odd because of their deformed foreheads. It was a fashionable thing to do among the royalty to show that they were truly somehow different from the commoners. Immediately after birth, high-class Yucatecan mothers would wash their infants, almost a form of baptism, and fasten them into a cradle, which compressed their heads between two boards that permanently flattened their foreheads. This 2-day procedure was considered a mark of beauty. Boys and young men were raised away from their birth family in a communal building to learn the arts of war, gambling, and the ball game. It is said prostitutes were frequent visitors. There was, however, a double standard for girls who were raised by their mothers, and lapses of chastity were punished severely. Marriages were arranged according to strict rules, including that the groom had to be someone from outside the immediate clan. Monogamy was the general rule unless the husband was rich and could afford more wives. Once married, though, adultery was punishable by death. Until marriage, young boys painted themselves black. After marriage, both men and women tattooed and cut themselves to create decorative scars. Going to heaven was not assured, so people feared death greatly, yet ordinary family members were buried beneath the dirt floor of their hut, their mouths filled with food and a jade bead. The long-term drought was the first big catastrophe that traumatized people, killing many and forcing many changes in life. It was these Mayans who did not take too kindly to the Spanish explorers, and the first Spaniards to land in the Yucatan at Cape Catuche were lured to shore and ambushed. They survived only to get beaten again at Campeche while looking for fresh water. The Spaniards would leave the Mayans and the Yucatan alone for decades, since there was no gold or silver and the land was not very fertile. The Mayans resisted later serious Spanish efforts to dominate them militarily and to pacify them with religion. In fact, it took almost 200 years, in 1697, to subdue the last independent remote Mayan kingdom. The Spanish were successful only after 90% of the indigenous Mayans died from European diseases and were not there to fight. Diseases such as smallpox, cholera, the flu, measles, the plague, and typhoid fever. Even after conquest, there were frequent revolts, and the Catholic faith was only partly successful, in part because the Spaniards did not follow their own religion as regards to loving their neighbors as themselves, and the cruelties of slavery and the Inquisition that found its way to the Spanish colonies. Ancient customs were incorporated into the Central American version of Catholicism, and it remains so today in many quarters. The Mayan culture is still healing from many effects of catastrophic climate-forced changes and the forced destruction of their culture by Europeans who judged them less than human. Their tribal customs, rural way of life, and separate languages gave them cohesion and resistance to the changes that occurred just because someone else didn't like their culture. Their way of life is family-friendly and environmentally sustainable. But for historical reasons, they have every reason to not trust foreigners and others outside their group. There is still a problem with corrupt politicians and drug and human traffickers taking advantage of them, with tragedies all around. It's probably why there are so many Mayans from Central America who emigrate to start a new life. This video is intended to help understand the Mayan people who have suffered and survived so much, respecting them and their life lessons. This second part of this video is to show you 16 specific sites that we visited and are now open for tourism. We flew into Cancun, going to our hotel near Tulum. Ancient Tulum was an important port on the coastal water trade route for the Maya, from Veracruz on Mexico's east coast down around the Yucatan Peninsula to Honduras. This seaport was a connect point for the Maya jade and turquoise trade, perched as it is on a high 40-foot high cliff. We visited nearby Muyil, which is much older than Tulum. It is thought that a series of canals connected Muyil with the Caribbean coast, but is now preserved as the Shan Khan Biosphere, an area that travels through 4 different ecozones. It is a UNESCO World Site.
Into the mangroves we go.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
this is exciting.
These are the mangroves?
Yeah.
Yes.
Use caution.
This is very slippery.
So worth fighting for. That was so wonderful.
We're dripping on everyone. I don't know. He said it was a tiger heron.
Chili.
Chili?
Is it? No? Cold?
Not from where
No.
I come from.
No.
Nearby Yucatecan sites include Coba, which once had as many as 50,000 inhabitants, as it had plenty of water and rain and agricultural fields for crops. It also controlled many ancient trade routes. The well-known Chichen Itza is one of the largest Mayan centers on the peninsula. This site reveals a lot of the influence from the Toltec and was in charge of an alliance with other kingdoms for a couple of centuries. There are 4 large cenotes around the city. It is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's one of the best preserved Mayan sites, and millions of visitors come each year. Mayapan is another important Yucatecan site, once also a ruling city of much of the peninsula. It had as many as 200,000 inhabitants in the area and well over 8,000 buildings and homes. It was the last capital of the Mayan civilization before it was reportedly attacked and sacked by a rival Mayan king and some Aztec. It is a very well preserved site. We stayed overnight in a Mexican hacienda in Campeche, Mexico, now a hotel. We visited another hacienda that made sisal rope for over 100 years from henequen, a kind of agave.
This is nothing but ancestral knowledge. Please, let's see it. Malo, malo.
Uxmal is another important Mayan site and once had a powerful alliance with Chichen Itza. Construction stopped around 1200 AD, at about the same time as the fall of Chichen Itza. Even after the ruling nobility left, many people stayed in the area. This is the fascinating Mayan Archaeological Museum in Campeche, which is housed in Fort San Miguel, which defended Campeche against marauding pirates in the late 1700s. It features many Mayan artifacts from Calakmul. We stayed overnight in the jungle near Calakmul in thatched roof outdoor cabins. Calakmul was once home to 50,000 people and 6,700 structures. The entire site is 27 square miles. The city-state collapsed around 900 AD, and it was almost completely covered by jungle until a pilot noticed something around 1931. Many stone slabs or stelae have been found here, and it is being worked by Mexican archaeologists. It has been abandoned for maybe 1,100 years. Kunlik, which is surrounded by a dense subtropical rainforest, has at least 200 still unexcavated mounds. It was elaborately planned and engineered with raised platforms, pyramids, citadels, courtyards, and plazas, all with channel drainage into a system of cisterns to collect the rainwater. Not a lot is known, not even its Mayan name. It is thought to have been settled around 200 BC. Bacan is named for a drainage ditch surrounding the center of the city. Clay items and figurines from Teotihuacan demonstrate that Bacan was on a trade route amongst area kingdoms. It is believed to have been first settled 2,500 years ago. Balamku boasts the largest surviving stucco frieze found at any excavated Mayan settlement dating back to 550 AD. It is a small site. The site at Palenque is fairly unique in that it is built on 3 levels and follows the contours of the local hills. There are over 1,000 buildings, including pyramids, palaces, courtyards, fountains, and artificial pools. It is a medium-sized city-state with perhaps over 1,000 structures still covered by the jungle. The site was abandoned by 800 AD and mostly covered now by the jungle. We traveled to Frontera Corozal, which is on the Usumacinta River, which is on the border between Mexico and Guatemala. We took a boat ride to a remote site on the Mexican side. This is the entrance to Yaxchilan, which was once a large urban center and the dominant power of this river region 1,000 years ago. The Grand Plaza, the Grand Acropolis, and the Small Acropolis have been uncovered, but there are over 120 structures remaining to be uncovered. The temples were highly decorated and extended along the shores of the Usumacinta. Yaxchilan was abandoned as a capital around 808 AD.
Some of them are very small and very dangerous.
Bonampak is very well known for its engraved and sculptured stele and its very detailed murals that document ritual life. We then crossed into and over the Sierra Madre mountain range. Our last ancient site was Tonina, one of the westernmost powerhouse Mayan kingdoms, and notable for its aggressive actions, dominating many others. It is also the site of one of the tallest pyramid temples in Mexico. It's even taller than the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan. It is also noted for having the last known long count date on any Maya monument, marking the end of the classic Maya period in 909 AD. Chamula, around 7 miles from San Cristobal, is a city where many Maya-descended people live, especially those who speak Tzotzil. They still keep many of the old ways alive. The walls of the church are filled with little monuments to Catholic saints and Mayan gods. Hundreds of candles are lit and the people sit on the floor and pray for their loved ones. Curanderos are in attendance to diagnose physical and emotional afflictions. Families kneel in attendance to their chosen god and bring sacrificial items, bring more candles, and drink ceremonial pash, a homemade sugarcane-based liquor, and chant prayers in Tzotzil. Not far away is a cemetery that is also unusual. The graves are covered with pine branches and needles. They are an offering of perfume to keep evil spirits away. This trip and this video are a wonderful insight into the Maya, their present way of life, and their cultural history. Thank you for joining us.